The Avengers and Fantastic Four-centric Empire event sees the teams join forces to repel a combined Kree-Skrull invasion of Earth. With the storyline kicking off fully this month, a series of one-shots have been released to set the scene for the main event series. One of those is Lords of Empyre, Emperor Hulkling, catching us up on how former Young Avenger Teddy Altman came to sit on the throne of the new alliance. There's plenty to enjoy about the tie-in title, but I'd like to spend some time today talking about the book's impact outside of the Marvel Universe. Welcome to the Krusty Fox, and this is why Emperor Hulkling is such an important step forward for LGBTQ+ representation. What's immediately striking about Emperor Hulkling is that the core of its story isn't the looming threat of invasion, but its personal impact on Hulkling and fiancée Wiccan. That might not sound especially significant at first glance, but let me ask you this. When was the last time you read a comic book about a healthy gay relationship? If you answered never, you wouldn't be far off. Marvel has made some positive moves in terms of featuring LGBTQ+ characters such as Northstar, Daken, Mystique and Iceman, but more often than not, their sexual orientation is a reference or plot device rather than a fully realised character trait. When the Young Avengers were introduced by Alan Heinberg and Jim Cheung back in 2005, it was immediately apparent that a different approach was being taken when it came to core team members and boyfriends Hulkling and Wiccan. The actual amount of space on the page dedicated to exploring their relationship has waxed and waned over the years as the Young Avengers themselves have passed in and out of stories. And when it has featured, it hasn't always been at the same level you'd see for any of Marvel's numerous straight pairings. Not so in Emperor Hulkling, which to my knowledge is one of the most three-dimensional and nuanced depictions of a gay relationship in mainstream comics, which is pretty good going for a standalone book. Brought to life vibrantly and with obvious love by writers Chip Zdarsky and Anthony Oliveira, artist Manuel Garcia, colorist Triona Farrell and letterer Travis Lanham, the Lords of Empyre one-shot closely examines the weight of Teddy's decision to leave Earth behind and take up his birthright. But moreover, it takes a rare and lingering look at how that decision affects the most important part of his life, his relationship with Wiccan. Now, full disclosure, I'm a 90s kid, so my regular pulls were the decade's biggest hits for Marvel, Spider-Man and the X-Men. Growing up, comics largely reflected the other media of the time, in the sense that LGBTQ+ representation was minimal at best and regarded as a punchline at worst. Within those comics, I don't remember a single LGBTQ+ character ever appearing. That's not to say that they necessarily should have featured on a regular basis for the sake of it, as tokenism isn't a solution. But for them to never explicitly feature? Gay people existed in the 90s. I existed. And what a lot of people don't get, because they've never had cause to get it, is that seeing yourself represented in the media you consume as a kid is important. Not just because, not to fulfill a quota or an agenda, but because going your entire childhood, which for many LGBTQ+ people was and still is, spent in a scary and isolated closet, without seeing who you are positively portrayed in your entertainment, leaves a mark. Comics, which are routinely a medium for seeking out and role modelling the best of people, have a historically shaky relationship with representation, which is, rightly or wrongly, tied to societal attitudes and, by extension, sales. The 90s were no different. No publisher was going to plough money into a comic book centered around a character nobody was going to buy and read. Equally, the conversation around minority representation had a much lower profile back then, and so the majority of writers wrote what they knew. For most of them, that was, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, being straight, white, and cisgender. None of which are problems on their own. But when those groups are all that's represented in comics, anybody who isn't those things therefore takes impressions away from that. They think that they don't deserve to be represented. They can't be noteworthy or heroic. Nobody wants to see or hear from them or know their story. Sadly, a brief look at social media tells you that there's a steadily shrinking minority who still believe that people should feel that way. That any attempt by creatives to reflect the real world in their stories is pushing some nefarious agenda, or that featuring minority characters in stories is somehow a slight on the majority. But, and I don't know how to break this to you if you consider it to be in any way controversial, non-heterosexual people exist. Black and minority ethnic people exist. Transgender and non-binary people exist. Feeling that your comic should only reflect what you see in the mirror at the exclusion of anybody different doesn't say anything positive about you. After all, those people who don't look or act like you have been buying and enjoying comic books about people who are like you for years. Why expect an empathetic reaction from them that you aren't willing to have yourself? And that's why Emperor Hulkling is such an important entry into that conversation. Anybody with even a passing knowledge of Hulkling as a character is probably already aware that he's gay and in a long-term relationship with Wiccan, which has most recently developed into an engagement. But this comic is the most interesting and tender exploration of their relationship I've ever seen. It doesn't treat a gay love story as expendable or a quirky background detail. It's right there from the off, up front, as the lens through which the entire story plays out. Hulkling and Wiccan discuss their feelings, support each other, have sex. You know, the way couples actually do. While the story's duty to the wider plot of Empire necessitates them being separated, the key deviation from the norm is that the matter isn't left there. After supporting and showing up for Teddy throughout the book, we see near its close that Billy's bond with his fiancée is so deep that even an intergalactic war can't truly keep them apart. Billy gets Teddy's motivations without a word passing between them. He doesn't sulk, he doesn't rage. He shores him up, reassures him, and in the end finds a way for their relationship to endure even when the might of two entire civilizations is against them. Laid out in plain terms, that storyline doesn't sound like anything necessarily exceptional. In the wider context of comic books, the concept of star-crossed lovers tragically separated by time and space is a familiar one. But for gay characters? Rare. For those characters to persist together and not let their circumstances destroy what they have? Practically unheard of. That's why Emperor Hulkling is an important comic. LGBTQ+ kids growing up right now will see this story and themselves reflected in it. They'll see that they're not alone, that there are people like them who fall in love, hold tight to each other when others are trying to keep them apart, and live full, rich, and meaningful lives. That the full and open expression of their sexuality isn't something the world has the right to silence or use against them. Hell, there are adults right now who could do with that message. Speaking as somebody who enjoyed the questionable and unfortunately not at all rare privilege of having their development warped by the intolerance of others, seeing characters like me experiencing ups and downs of life and love I can directly relate to is still an infrequent novelty. It's still important. And it won't be for everyone. If you haven't had those experiences, it might just be a nice story penciled and inked beautifully. But for those who have been to those places in their lives, trust me when I tell you that the value of it is incalculable. Feel free to accuse me of overstating the matter, but it literally saves lives. So, thank you to Chip, Anthony, Manuel, Triona, and Travis. Thank you to Marvel for finally telling a three-dimensional, fully intimate gay love story. And thank you to you for listening to me shout down from the dizzying heights of my soapbox. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like to let me know and subscribe for more Marvel content in the future. Either way, thanks for watching, and as ever, if you can't be good, be crusty.